Good morning. We're going to try this again. I am Dean Beth Bretzlaff, and I welcome you to the 141st Synod of the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa.
The video is on.
Okay, we're having a little technical start here that needs to be. Okay. Third time lucky. Good morning again. We're going to start over. Welcome to the 141st Synod of the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa. Hopefully next time we'll be in person and we won't have to worry about all these technological issues. As we gather virtually, let us acknowledge the Aboriginal land that has been inhabited and cared for by Indigenous peoples from the beginning, and in particular the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We also recognize the contributions that Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made in shaping and strengthening our communities. May we walk together in Christ's grace and peace, seeking renewed relationship based on honor, respect, and peace. Let us take a moment of silent prayer, followed by an opening prayer. Let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for the life that you breathe into us, for the love you have shown us in the gift of Jesus, and for the empowering Spirit, always present and always at work in our church. We thank you for the witness of those who have gone before us, especially giving thanks for those members of Synod who died this past year. The Reverend Canon Leonard Baird, the Reverend Michael Hicks, the Reverend Canon Dr. David Marr, the Reverend Helen Resmer, the Venerable Ralph Smith, the Reverend Patricia Stewart, the Reverend John Terrell, Canon Ellen Winship, and any other members of Synod unknown to us. May their souls rest in peace, and may their witness and ministry live in and through us. May your Holy Spirit be powerfully at work among us during this Synod. Guide and bless Bishop Shane. Strengthen our diocesan church. Help us to respond to the challenges of this time and inspire us to become the church you call us to be. We ask these prayers in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Bishop, I need to report to you that out of 79 registered clergy, we have a total of 60 clergy present. Out of a total of 155 registered lay members of Synod, we have a total of 120 voting lay members present. We therefore have quorum.
Thank you very much. And I now call this session of Synod to order. It's good to see so many of you, although how nice it would be to see you in person. I would ask you to ensure that your mute button is on so we don't get any feedback. That's really helpful. And I'm happy to bring greetings from Archbishop Anne Germond, the Metropolitan of Ontario, and also our colleagues and friends in the dioceses of Niagara and Ontario, who are also having synods today. I'll turn things over to our clerical secretary of Synod now, the Reverend Stephen Silverthorne, who's going to give us some etiquette tips.
Thank you, Bishop. This includes more than which fork to use. What you will find helpful throughout our Synod time together is, first of all, as the Bishop mentioned, to keep yourselves on mute until such time as you need to speak. If you encounter any difficulties with the audio-visual in our synod time today, please use the chat function and send a message directly to Heidi Fawcett, who will be monitoring our proceedings today. And to let you know that today is being recorded and it is also being live streamed through YouTube, which means to say that there are some people who are watching who are not members of Synod, but they're watching live streamed online. And so throughout our time together, you're quite welcome to turn off your video portion, and that can be done through your Zoom app. You're quite welcome to turn that off during the proceedings until such time as that you may need to speak during our time together. And also to mention that throughout our service or our time today, we'll have 2 opportunities for breaks that will allow you to get a snack or do whatever you need to do during that time. But if you are muted and your video is off, feel free to step away from your screen for just a moment if you need to. Lastly, to say that there are important votes that will be taking place today at Synod. These are all using slightly, or some of them using slightly different procedures for the voting. We'll explain them as you get a little bit closer. But to pay close attention before the votes to ensure that you understand how voting takes place. The mechanics are important, particularly when we're talking about votes regarding the canons, bylaws, and regulations of our diocese, because these are specialized instructions. So do pay attention to those when they come up. That's it, I think, for Zoom etiquette for us today. I'd like to pass it back on to my lay, or back to the bishop, and then I and the lay secretary will have a few more words. This is for our Omnibus Motion.
Thank you, Stephen. I will ask our lay secretary, synod, and chaplain to explain the opening procedural motion at this time.
Thank you, Bishop. There is a motion at the beginning of your circular and in the package you were sent. That is the Omnibus Motion, which begins our proceedings. It does several things. It grants the privileges of the House. It appoints our sessional committees, the committees that we need to operate as Synod. It adopts the agenda, approves the 2020 minutes. That is a new innovation this year. We're approving the minutes from last year, and receives the financial reports as distributed, of course, in the Synod package. If anyone has questions or something specific about this motion, they could indicate by indicating in the chat that they have a question. Otherwise, we will proceed to move this motion as part of our opening proceedings. So I hereby move that Synod approve an omnibus motion that grants the privileges of the House, appoints sessional committees, adopts the agenda, approves the 2020 minutes, and receives the financial reports as distributed in the Synod package.
Thank you very much, Anne. The motion is now before us. Please make sure everyone in this room is speaking. The motion is now before you. Please vote as indicated. That motion has passed. I will now invite Brian Cameron, who's the chair of the Episcopal Communications Panel, to make a short update on our top strategic priority concerning communications, and also to set up the launch of our new brand. Brian?
Thank you, Bishop. Good morning, everyone. Before updating you on strategic priority 1, I'd just like to briefly recap how communications became priority 1. Next slide, Heidi. So diocesan communications developed incrementally over the years without a guiding strategy or clear lines of responsibility. The diocese has always had gifted staff who produce a variety of communications products, but these products were not integrated with each other and lacked consistent messaging and branding. As a result, the diocese has not been as effective as it could be in communicating with parishes, individual Anglicans, and the wider world. This weakness has been apparent for some time, but COVID-19 underlined the critical importance of improving communications. Next slide. So to respond to this need, the bishop appointed the Diocesan Communication Advisory Panel in May 2020. And the members are as follows: Beth Bretzlaff, myself as chair, Jeff Chapman, Jane Coots, Gillian Hoyer, Jane Scanlon, and Jamie Tomlinson. The panel was tasked with developing a 3-year strategic plan for diocesan communications. In addition, the panel is to provide advice and guidance on an ongoing basis to the bishop and diocesan staff to help advance the goals of the strategic plan. Next slide, please. So the plan that the panel developed was based on the following building blocks: a vision of what the diocese communication should be, an identification of its target audiences, the most effective ways of reaching those audiences, and an analysis of existing communications channels. Next slide, please. The strategic plan ranks the top priorities for improving communications. The first priority was to initiate a branding exercise that would explore and name the diocese vision and values, and then express the vision and values in a logo and a common look and feel for all communications channels. The plan also identified the diocesan website as the communications channel most in need of improvement. Several firms specializing in branding responded to our request for proposals, and that firm selected was BTA Advertising. Tori Lawrence, who was the firm's lead in this project, will shortly take us through the process that we followed and unveil the diocese's new logo and look for all its communications channels. She will also do a little preview of what our renewed website will look like. We on the panel, as well as the bishop and many others who took part in the process, are really pleased and excited by the results of their work, and that hope that you will feel the same way. Next slide, please. So what's the status of priority 1 now and what lies ahead? First, it's safe to say that the strategic dimension of communications has now been addressed. Communications will remain an ongoing priority, and the advisory panel will continue to provide advice and direction going forward. Here are some of the ongoing and planned items on our agenda. Development of a narrative budget will make clear how our money is spent on ministries. It will not replace the detailed line item budget, but it will provide a much clearer idea for people who are not into looking at a lot of difficult figures. The 125th anniversary commemoration, about which I'll have more to say later this morning. Social media and website protocols, guidelines for seeking media coverage. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the panel for their contributions in addressing priority 1, not least Jane Scanlon, who's been tireless and creative in overseeing the implementation of our work, as well as Heidi Fawcett for her always efficient coordinating role. The work has been challenging, but also very rewarding, and we've all enjoyed exploring our perceptions and ideas about diocesan communications, then prioritizing these and putting them together in a coherent plan. And now I'll turn the floor over to Tori Lawrence, who, as I said, led the BTA team that shepherded us through the branding process. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Bishop Shane. I'm now going to attempt to share my screen. Give me just a moment while I do that. Is everybody seeing this? Yes? Okay. Thank you. As Brian mentioned, my name is Tori Lawrence, and I'm a partner with BTA Advertising. We're an advertising and branding firm located in Toronto, and it's been our pleasure to work through this process and this project for the Anglican Diocese. The objective of our work is to develop a brand identity that will reflect the vision of the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa and provide greater connection with its parish and community ministries. Our process, we've been working together for several months now, and it's been a very consultative process. So we've been working with a core stakeholder group at the diocese. We've held several positioning workshops, and through our process, we actually have presented several logo iterations. What I'm going to show you this morning is the result of that work. So our first process was in and around positioning, which is really kind of a language workshop, and I'll take you through that first. And then ultimately, we arrived at our core logo design. Once we arrived at that core logo design, we had additional focus groups with broader groups within the community for input and feedback. So the first piece of our brand work is defining our brand pillars. And ultimately, this is about how we want to be perceived within our target audiences. This actually derives from the strategic planning work that was underway from the communications team. So, here we go. So first up, we want to be perceived as being a collaborative leader, being dedicated to lifelong formation, worship, and hospitality, being effective stewards of parishes and ministries, being open to change and engagement with the world, and ultimately Anglican. And what this means is being distinctly different from other Christian groups. When we look at our target audiences, we have two target audiences, and in some cases, those target audiences will overlap. Ultimately, we have the group of Anglicans, and that they can be urban, they could be rural, they could be engaged with diocese, or they could have a more passive relationship with the diocese. Some might have a lifelong relationship or an intergenerational relationship. We also need to consider the non-Anglican community, and that could be people who are engaged or impacted with the work that happens within the community ministries. That could also be spiritual seekers, and they could also be institutional organizations like the city and the province and the country. And ultimately, including Indigenous people as a part of our target audiences is an important thing to consider. Ultimately, when we look at our target audiences coming together, now we're talking about the brand values. And these are the things ultimately that we want them to know that we care about. And that is people and humanity. That is Anglicanism. That is the commitment to personal growth and service. Our brand character, in the brand world, we describe brand character as if you used words to describe something as a person. Ultimately, we want to be known to be vibrant, to be innovative, to be open, to be compassionate, and to be faithful. We did quite a bit of work and workshopping to actually arrive at these brand characteristics and our personality. And so this shows you just a little bit of that deeper work. We had several brainstorms that helped us kind of derive and pinpoint the choice of language to describe our personality and characteristics. And ultimately our brand essence. So this is kind of a feeling and a bit of a takeaway, and this is going to inspire the design that you're about to see. This notion of opened hearts, minds, and opened arms. So I'll present to you now our final logo concept. The concept itself is meant to evoke many different lines beaming from and coming towards an invisible source or a common purpose. The feeling is joyful and energizing. And this is our new logo, our new identity. I'm now going to take you through some applications that will kind of help you picture how this is going to come to life across a number of different communication materials. Oh, before I do that, we also did a focus group with the broader community, as I mentioned off the top. And this is some feedback. These are some quotes from people that we talked to when we presented the logo to them. I like the warm feeling it gives me. It feels like an embrace. It is compassionate. The rays make me think of the sun. I see the openness of the circle as a kind of sacred space, and there's an openness to God's presence coming into that center. Next part of our visual identity is color. And we wanted to have a modernized color palette that had some motion to it, this kind of feeling of ever evolving and ever changing color. So obviously our primary color is rooted in the Episcopal purple. We're also seeing yellows and oranges that evoke a feeling of warmth, and of course the ever important red. We also have this feeling of a gradient, as I mentioned, colors changing and things moving over time. Our typeface as well, you'll start to see this reflected not only in the typeface that's associated with the logo, but throughout other communication materials. And I'll show you some examples of all of this coming together in action. So first of all, the logo itself, we need to ensure that it works not only in its full color format, which you will see on the left, but it also works quite well in a one color version, a black only, or a reverse sort of scenario where we've relied on the purple as being our core anchor. We've also introduced an association with your anniversary. So for the 125th, so you can see how those two connect. We've applied the purple and the typeface, connecting that back to the logo. And we've also included an association where we have our rays connecting and sort of embracing the logo and the word marks for the community ministries. This ray graphic that we speak to is also going to be a key design element that we'll see across a number of different materials. So we have this gradient overlay that gives a feeling of warmth and energy. We also can use this ray graphic as a pattern, as you can see in the sort of more yellow version in the middle. And then there's also non-circular applications, which give a little bit of detail and a little bit of connection and a little bit of visual storytelling across our materials. Here's a sample of what a homepage will look like for your newly designed website, which we are in the process of working with your team to bring that to life. So we're doing a number of different things with the website. We're trying to refine and streamline the user experience. So that will be apparent when you take a look at things like the navigation bar across the top, trying to simplify where we want to point users throughout the journey. We would like to launch the site with full color and to draw people in with our core visual elements. And then to the right here, you're going to see some page designs. And this is all about bringing focus to the articles and the content that is displayed within the website. You can see things like color being applied there. You can see some evocative photography as well coming to life. When we look at subpages, things like a directory page, for example, you'll see that gradient color bar, which will flow across the type, the application of our typeface throughout the site, and also our color palette. And the same thing here, you can see the header and the footer and how the brand will be reflective in a very vibrant way on your main website. This last page gives you just a little bit of a snapshot on how all of this will actually come to life across a number of different materials. We have examples here of letterhead, business cards, PowerPoint templates, a redesign of crosstalk, as well as your e-newsletter. So hopefully with this, you are inspired to see how this new brand will come to life across a number of different communication materials. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tori. It's been a pleasure to work with you and your team. And as I said in my charge, I believe that we can all see how this new brand celebrates us and how it will challenge us also to live up to those values and that essence and the way we wish to be understood in the world around us. So thank you so very much, Tori. And thank you, Brian, and your team as well for the work you have done to bring us to this point and the work that you have outlined for us, which lies ahead. So good work, well done on our top strategic priority. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good. We have 3 minutes. If you have a burning question, now would be the time. Deanne Stevens. Deanne has a question, I believe. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Bishop. As a former webmaster, I'm wondering about the predominance of shades of red, purple, and orange, which are not accessible to people who are red-green colorblind. Could somebody respond to this concern, please?
What I will suggest is that that issue be taken up by the communications panel. Okay, we'll refer it to Brian and the panel, and they can get back to you on that. Okay,
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. It's always important to pay careful attention to accessibility in all we do.
Yeah.
Good. Is there another question? Robert Sicard has a question.
Thank you. Will the brand be trademarked and copyrighted?
That's an excellent question. We will do all we can to protect our brand, understanding that being our brand is far more important than protecting it. So thank you for that question, Robert. We'll certainly look into that. Heather McLaughlin.
I wonder how parishes can be supported in using the brand. I mean, are we sort of going to, all of us, develop this as, this feeling? I mean, it's a wonderful logo. I love it.
I'll ask Beth, Canon, or Dean Beth rather, to respond to that because the parish of the cathedral is engaged in that work. Wow. Beth, would you mind speaking to that, please? We're having difficulty here, so I'm going to ask Brian Cameron to speak to that, please.
Well, not to speak for Beth, but I do know that she is looking at incorporating the elements of this design into the cathedral website. It's not something that we expect parishes to copy, but we hope that it inspires you in terms of both the look and feel, and also the navigability of the website. That was one of the big issues for us with the existing website. BTA has come up with something that's really clear and very simple. So we hope that can provide a model for you.
Thank you, Brian. No. So there will be what's called a style guide provided to us, which will be available to anyone who wishes to see it, which talks about how the logo can be used in different contexts. So that may be helpful to parishes as we move forward. Thank you again, Brian, and thank you to your team. We're going to move now to our second strategic priority, and I will invite the Reverend Dr. John Martin and co-chair Anne-Marie Clydesdale and Barb Gagne to present an update on our second strategic priority.
Thank you, Bishop. Good morning, everyone. As co-chairs of the Shape of Parish Ministry consultation, we are happy to have a chance to address you this morning.
Barbara Gagne is going to give you a full report in just a moment, but we wanted to say just how fascinating it has been to have the opportunity to get a glimpse into the lives of our diocesan parishes. There are some interesting things going on in those lives, more than we might have expected.
People are making creative uses of their properties, from community outreach programs to food trucks and parking lots. Who knew? And as well, there seem to have been some commonalities shared across our parishes when it comes to parish gifts and talents as well as struggles.
For example, every parish seems to be very warm, welcoming, hospitable, and friendly. Many even acknowledge that most others will say this, but in their case, it really is true. Alas, it also appears that few new people are coming to church these days.
And as well, everyone seems pretty sure that if we could just get the young people back in church, all of our problems would be solved. However, we also need people that happen to have lots of money to give to the church so our bills can be paid.
The solution seems obvious. It would, if we could only find a way to change everything up and be a new church, while still doing all the traditional things we already do, but better, then we would be fine.
Indeed, Anne-Marie, it does seem to be the case. Now, while some of this has allowed for a bit of a chuckle, we have to say that the amount of passion and amazing ministry going on across our diocese should not be underestimated. There is a lot that we can all be proud of across our diocese.
There's a lot to build on and an excitement to explore and expand what it means to be church.
And now I'd like to invite Barbara Gagne to give you an update on our work so far and what our next steps will be. Barb, over to you.
Thanks, John and Anne-Marie. Can I have the next slide, Heidi? Over the next few minutes, what I'm going to walk you through are the final steps to us completing stage 1 of our project with you. And then we'll get a little bit of a brief look ahead at stage 2. Over the summer and fall, the Shape of Parish Ministries team has interviewed 78 congregations at every corner of our diocese and has received input to the 5 questions from 3 special interest groups. We have had the opportunity through various Zoom calls or in-person interviews to hear your stories. And as John and Anne-Marie have just shared, we are witnesses to the amazing work being done in all corners of our diocese. We have heard the many talented and generous people who bring life to your parish ministries. And we are inspired by your dedication and hard work. We appreciate that there was a lot of work taken to get us to the point of interviewing with each of your congregations. And that was many hours and many discussions and consultations internally within your parishes. So on behalf of my teammates, we want to thank you who are on this synod call today, as well as everybody in your congregation that worked to get us to have those wonderful conversations. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Next slide, please. There are just remaining a few final steps to complete and deliver our stage 1 deliverable. And this slide will take you through some of those steps. And there is one point at which we will come back to you in the next month to ask for a final bit of assistance in completing stage 1. Over the course of the last week, the Shape of Parish Ministries team has finished documenting all of the interviews that we conducted, and we have shared them amongst ourselves to do a little bit of standardizing and grammar checking of the parish profiles that we produced, but also to do a bit of validation internally to make sure that we have not introduced any judgment or analysis into the materials. The product that we have produced are profiles of 2 to 3 pages in length, and they are based on the documentation that you provided us prior to the interviews, our interview notes from our conversations with you, and any other documentation you may have directed your facilitator to look at. Obviously, in producing 2 to 3 pages, not everything that we received from you was able to be included, but we have done our best to present what we feel is an honest reflection of the conversations we've held with you. Now that we are finished with producing those profiles, we are about to release them to you for validation. So this Wednesday, look in your inbox because you will be receiving your congregation's parish profile. They will be coming on November 3rd from the facilitator that you met with during the interview process. Validation is meant that we want you to look at those 2 to 3 pages and ensure that we have not misrepresented what you wanted us to understand and take away for the answers to the 5 questions. We are giving you a week to do that. They are due back to us November 10th. I know that sounds very short, but these are only 2 to 3 pages. So we are asking you to do your best in that period of time. It is not necessary for you to go back to a full parish consultation to do the validation. It is our suggestion that you use the people that were on the Zoom or in-person interviews with us as your source to review the document. And we're looking at trying to remain within the 2 to 3 pages of length. So please just highlight those things that you think are the most important edits or amendments that you want us to take in finalizing your profile. So those will be coming to you this Wednesday and due back on November 10th. From there, the Shape of Parish Ministry team will incorporate the final edits received from the parishes and congregations and send those to our administrative resource who will be preparing a final compendium. The deliverable for stage 1 is being called a parish compendium. In it, it will include the profiles of every congregation and parish that was interviewed as in those 2 to 3 page profiles. It will also include the graphic representation of your demographic report that you provided the team, as well as a image of the statistical returns for the last 10 years that you have delivered to our diocese each of the last 10 years, as well as a number of selected graphic representations from those statistical data. They will be compiled into this one book, and it will contain every parish's, congregation's profiles and statistical material for our whole diocese. That will be delivered to the parishes as of November 24th. It will be in electronic form, but we do appreciate that some parishes and congregations would prefer a hard copy, but given that it's a very large document, we're asking for that request to be printed, if you want a printed copy, to be on a as absolutely needed basis and contact us and we will make that happen. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, the next stage will be stage 2. It will begin with the release of the compendium at the end of November and run through February 2022. This is the stage where we move from data gathering, which was stage 1, into analysis. And its objective is to consider the local realities, not only yours, but all of the realities of each parish and congregation in our wider diocese. The tools you will have to use for this analysis stage will be obviously the compendium generated in stage 1. That will be your main source of information, and a toolkit which the Shape of Parish Ministry team is putting together and will make available to you to assist you through this analysis period with training and facilitation as may be needed. So that covers what we wanted to share with you as to where we are and where we're going next with the project of Strategic Priority 2. Main takeaway is this Wednesday, a document, your parish profiles will be coming to you, and we are looking for the return of those by November 10th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Anne-Marie and John. This is the work of our generation. It is now that we've got communications firmly in hand, it is now our top priority, in fact. And so I commend the work that has been done with sincere and deep thanks to the team who is leading us through this. And I encourage all of you to take it very, very seriously. There is not a lot of time for questions, but if there's something that you wish to ask now, we'll entertain a few questions. Otherwise, you can direct your questions to the Reverend Dr. John Martin or to my office if you have any concerns about how this priority is undergoing. Are there any questions now? Say it again. Someone by the name of Rick has a question.
Hi, my question is, my understanding previously was that parishes would have an opportunity to validate the 10-year financial return, or at least to look at it before it gets distributed beyond the parish. Is that something that's still possible?
Did Barbara address that?
It is not our intent to validate the data that is already on file with the diocese. That is material that we have accepted because it is the financial information on which the diocese has operated to date.
Thank you.
Again, please feel very free to raise any questions you have through the Reverend Dr. John Martin or Anne-Marie Clydesdale or through my office. Again, thanks to the team and thanks to all clergy and parish leaders for making this a priority. It is mandatory, but I hope we all know in our hearts and minds that this is a huge priority for us at this time. It's the work of our generation. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to introduce someone who is well known to many of us and certainly known probably to all of us. The Reverend Dr. John Gebo is a pastor, priest, and teacher. He is a theologian. He is an ecumenist whose ministry is global and national and local. His ministry is local in a very real sense because he is the canon theologian of our diocese. So it's a pleasure now to take a moment and to hear the words of a wise and caring priest. John.
Thank you, Shane, very much. And thank you for your invitation to be part of the Synod. Before the meeting began, I was able to scroll through and to see lots of familiar faces and old friends. I'm just so sorry that we're not in person. So Bishop Shane has asked me to share some reflections about what it means to be a diocesan church. A reflection that he began in his charge on Thursday evening at the opening Eucharist. In my work in ecumenism and theology at the World Council of Churches in Geneva, and later at the Anglican Communion Office in London, most of my energy touched on some aspect of the nature and mission of the church. So in 20 minutes or so, this can be no more than just an introduction. I'd like to start with the word ecclesiology. It comes from the two Greek words, ecclesia, meaning church, as in ecclesiastical, and logos, meaning the study of, words about, theological reflection upon. So ecclesiology is just the study or theological reflection on the nature and mission of the church. When I was at the World Council of Churches, busloads of young people on confirmation class tours of Geneva would come to visit. And for some bizarre reason, I was appointed to talk to them about the ecclesiological work of the Faith and Order Commission, just the sort of thing that European adolescents are just crazy about, or not. But I'd always begin my presentations with them by pulling out my iPhone. And I'd start to talk about mobile phones. Who had an Apple? Who had Android? Which was the best? Who had the coolest apps? And then I would ask, why aren't all of these apps compatible with each other? And the answer, of course, is different operating systems. I like to think of ecclesiology as the operating system of a church. I suspect most of us are more at home talking about apps than operating systems. For Christians, most of us are more comfortable talking about apps like prayer, Bible study, mission, justice and peace, or worship. But to be functional, churches also need people, like members of diocesan synods, who understand ecclesiastical operating systems, because apps do not function without appropriate operating systems. Apps are what we do. An operating system is who we are. As a theological discipline, ecclesiology is pretty new, only about 100 years old. Yet, from the New Testament onwards, theological reflection on the church is as old as Christianity itself. As Anglicans, we get echoes of that long tradition when we say the ancient baptismal creed, the Apostles' Creed, and proclaim our faith in the church, which is holy and Catholic. Or in the Nicene Creed, when we proclaim the church as one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. The modern discipline of ecclesiology emerged in the context of a crisis, the abnormal situation of Christian disunity. So often the things that keep churches apart aren't the things we can see, the apps, but what underlies them, their operating systems. There has been tremendous interest in ecclesiology from Anglicans who are concerned not only about the wider Christian unity, but also about the fragility of the Anglican communion. It's interesting to note that since the 1970s, when there have been serious disagreements between and within the churches of the Anglican communion, the habitual response is not to address the issue head on, but to reflect more deeply on ecclesiology and on the nature of this gift of communion that we have been given. A fundamental ecclesiological question today is, can communion contain conflict so that conflict loses its power to divide? That's both an ecclesiological question and a profoundly practical question for us. Now, ecclesiology can sound pretty abstract and remote from the day-to-day life of the church. It's abstract in the way that sociology is abstract. Like sociology, ecclesiology deals with real communities in real time. Like sociology, ecclesiology is about something observable. And like sociology, it gives us the categories and vocabulary to describe how Christian communities function in their lives as in communities and in their mission. I've been much helped over the last number of years on my work in ecclesiology by conversations I've had with the former professor of pastoral sociology at St. Paul University. Some of you know him today as Shane Parker, our bishop. St. Paul University is the only place I know of that teaches pastoral sociology. Now, that may have changed since I left. But my impression is that having a good number of priests, and indeed senior priests, who have studied pastoral theology, and having a diocesan bishop who thinks sociologically and ecclesiologically gives the Diocese of Ottawa a very different feel in comparison with other dioceses that I know. Now, some global churches, like the Anglican Communion, have very descriptive ecclesiological self-definitions, while others never use the word. But every human community, including churches, has an operating system. It's a sociological given. Just as sociology gives a vocabulary and context to describe how human communities function and behave, so does ecclesiology for us. My ecclesiological starting point comes from my parents. I was taught that when I was a child that my religion was Anglican, but my church was St. Simon the Apostle in downtown Toronto. It's a pretty neat small world. The first time I ever encountered anything diocesan was at a Diocese of Toronto Servers Festival when I was 16. The diocese became a reality for me when I started to think about ordination. For the last 45 years or so, it has been diocese, and for the past 27 years, it's been the Diocese of Ottawa that I have identified with, not a parish, not an ecclesiastical province. For Anglican ecclesiology, the diocese is the basic building block of what we understand the church to be and to how we relate to one another as parishes, between dioceses, within an ecclesiastical province, a national church, and indeed the Anglican Communion. A diocese is not an Anglican invention. The Orthodox churches have dioceses, as does the Roman Catholic Church. Many, but not all, Lutheran churches have dioceses, sometimes called synods. It's something we have all inherited from our ancestors in the faith, part of the living tradition and mission of the church. Now, the term diocese doesn't appear in the church until the 4th century, and the word itself comes from an administrative subdivision of the Roman Empire. But the roots of our diocese are clear in the New Testament, especially in the letters of Paul to various churches. I often think that the introduction to Paul's letters are kind of a short form for New Testament ecclesiology. So consider these. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, to all God's beloved in Rome, who are called to be saints. Paul, an apostle, and all the members of the family of God who are with me, to the churches of Galatia. Paul and Timothy, servants of Christ Jesus, to all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi, with the bishops and the deacons. These and other New Testament churches were rooted and bore costly witness in places, in villages, towns, and cities. For ecclesiology from the very beginning, geography matters. We see the beginnings of leadership of the bishops and deacons in some places, and presbyters in others, that will become the threefold pattern of ministry that we know today: bishop, priest, and deacon. In the church of the first 3 centuries, a town would have had one Christian community that gathered as a house church led by one bishop, the pastor and shepherd of the whole community. It was the bishop who baptized new Christians, mostly adults. It was the bishop who presided at the Eucharist and who was the regular preacher and teacher in the community. It was the bishop who reconciled sinners. The bishop was the Christian most likely to be martyred. Next to the bishop, the most significant ministers were the deacons, who oversaw the outreach and mission of local churches, and who were the next most likely to be martyred. Priests were different. They functioned more like modern-day wardens or members of an advisory board, assisting the bishop in leadership. Now, many of these local churches owned buildings for worship, gathering, and hospitality. Often the bishop and the bishop's family lived in such a house. It was typically called in Latin the Domus Ecclesiae, the house or the home of the church. And it would have been pretty close in size to any modern Anglican church, Anglican parish, with hundreds, maybe a few thousand people. Ecclesiologically, the ancient house church is the direct ancestor of the modern cathedral, which is the bishop's church, but also the diocese home church, still the Domus Ecclesiae. If you have ever visited Germany or Italy, some of this lingers in the German and Italian words for cathedral, a dome in Germany, and in Italy, the Duomo. Just comes from that Latin word domus, house. That means that members of parishes can never be visitors and guests in their cathedral, because as members of a diocese, we are members of the one cathedral, which is home to us all. These early house churches were also the direct ancestors of a modern diocese. When Christianity was decriminalized by the Roman Empire in the 4th century and whole populations became Christian, the ecclesiastical structures were significantly modified in the new context. Rather than increasing the number of house church communities with their bishops and other ministers, they did something more creative. The numbers of bishops remained pretty constant in cities and towns. What changed was the multiplication of house churches in a town or city, still under one local bishop, who is represented in these local communities by a priest, delegated to represent the bishop in the celebration of the sacraments, leadership, teaching, and preaching. The local church that had spread out in different places was still the one community gathered around a single bishop, now called by a new name, a diocese, the basic expression of local church. I was so sorry that Bishop Shane was ordained a bishop during the pandemic, with maybe a community of 11 or 12 around him. On the other hand, probably more people attended that ordination via the internet than have ever attended an ordination in Christ Church Cathedral. Shane received all sorts of signs of his new ministry at that service: a pectoral cross, an Episcopal ring, a pastoral staff, and for me, most emotionally, a mitre. When he turned around with that mitre on his head, I knew something had changed. There is one thing that Shane did not receive at his ordination: a license to function as the Bishop of the Diocese of Ottawa. In fact, no bishop, no diocesan bishop has a license. They don't need one. From the ancient tradition of the church, the bishop is the pastor of the whole diocese. Retired or assistant bishops need a license, as do all priests and deacons, lay readers, and others. They receive their license from the one person who needs no license, the diocesan bishop. Back to a bit of history. As the diocesan churches increased in size and expanded geographically to places where there had never been Christians before, the first church structure to be built was the Bishops Cathedral. It was the center for mission and evangelism. It was the center for teaching, healthcare, governance, and leadership. It was from the cathedral that smaller parish churches would emerge. And this, again, this revised pattern of Christian community was the diocese. And this is the pattern that we know today, and we see in the life and mission of the Diocese of Ottawa. At the Reformation, some communities abolished dioceses altogether as non-biblical and too Catholic. For many of the emerging Protestant traditions, the local congregation became the basic unit of the church, which gives rise to the ecclesiological description of congregationalism. In its way, congregational ecclesiology undoes the development of the 4th century and the expansion of the local congregations into the diocesan congregation. The English Reformation changed and renewed much in the life of the church. But in terms of the diocese, the Church of England didn't change a thing, which is quite remarkable. With the expansion of the Anglican tradition from the 16th century onward across the globe, went the expansion of the diocesan structures to the diocese that you and I know today. The Diocese of Ottawa is in direct continuity with the Diocese of the Church of England, with the Diocese of the earliest church, and all the way back to the house churches of the New Testament. This is what we understand when we refer to the one holy, Catholic, and Apostolic Church. It's all here embedded in our diocesan ecclesiology. In his charge to us on Thursday evening, Bishop Shane spoke of our church, our diocese, not the diocese. We, not they. Every parish is ours. Every community ministry is ours. We are in communion with one another deeply and inextricably, and all this belongs to God in Christ Jesus. This, Bishop Shane, is diocesan ecclesiology in a nutshell. The only things that I would have added are our bishop, not the bishop, and our cathedral, not the cathedral. In his charge, our bishop identified a number of strategic priorities that I would identify as 6 apps: communications, the shape of parish ministry and their buildings, engagement with the world, lifelong learning, project racism, affordable housing. These 6 priorities, these 6 projects, these 6 apps will be nothing but window dressing without a corresponding operating system, the diocese, and a functioning, informed diocesan ecclesiology. No parish could take any of these on alone, but a diocese can. It's all here. Every parish is ours. Every community ministry is ours. We are in communion with one another deeply and inextricably. And it all belongs to God in Christ Jesus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, for telling the story of who we are as a diocesan church and helping us to appreciate more fully the importance of being a diocesan church as we face the future. Thank you so much for your wisdom, John, and your time this morning. We now have time for a break, and we will be able to break for the next 15 minutes. So we will resume at 35 plus 15, which is 9:50. Thank you all. Have a good break, and we'll see you at 9:50. Welcome back, everyone. I would now like to ask our Chancellor, Henry Schultz, to walk us through various amendments to our canons and then our bylaws. Over to you, Mr. Chancellor.
Thank you, Bishop. So, good morning, everyone. We're going from the sublime discussion of the diocesan church to the less than sublime but important work of bringing forward changes to the canons and bylaws of our diocese. So, over the next few minutes, I'll be discussing 8 different motions relating to amendments that involve amendments to 3 canons and 5 bylaws. These amendments fall into 5 subject matter categories. So we'll be discussing the amendments to canons and bylaws relating to on the rules relating to Episcopal elections, the election of bishops. Amendments to the canons and bylaws on matters relating to Episcopal remuneration, paying the bishop. Canon and bylaw amendments relating to the office of associate incumbent of a parish. Finally, some bylaw amendments dealing with miscellaneous matters, and lastly, some very much housekeeping amendments to the bylaws. So I want to stress that the process of preparing all these amendments has taken some time. They were all of them were prepared in consultation with the newly reactivated CBR subcommittee. They were subsequently reviewed by the governance committee, and as is required under our canons for all bylaw and canon amendments, they were all previously approved by diocesan council. And as part of our process of getting ready for today's synod, the amendments were all discussed at an information session that took place on Tuesday, October 12th, which I believe most of you attended. No changes have been made to any of the texts since that meeting, and I've had a couple of discussions with some of you about those issues. The other thing I want to stress is that the theme of today's discussions, amendments, is really filling in gaps. We are not making any substantive changes to the way we do things. There are no really substantive changes to our canons and bylaws. But the thing about any amendment process is it really doesn't matter how perceived, seemingly important a canon is or unimportant. There is always the process of amending a canon or a bylaw is always the same, and we have to go through it. So, as I said, there are 8 motions identified in the circular that was distributed to you as motions A through H, and we'll need to vote on each motion separately. We'll start with the 3 amendments to the canons and then the 5 amendments to the bylaws. The reason why we have to vote on the canons separately from the bylaws is the way that our own canons are set up. The process for making amendments to canons is much more it's much stricter than amending bylaws. So for a canon to be any amendment of a canon to be approved, it requires approval from not less than 2/3 of each order of the clergy and of the lay members present at synod. In other words, for an amendment to the canons to pass, approval will be required from 2/3 of the clergy present today at today's synod and 2/3 of the lay members present. By contrast, amendments to the bylaws are approved by, like any other motion, by way of a single majority. So, here's how we're going to amend the canons. What I will do for each of the 3 motions, I'll explain the motion, what's before you. And then when we call for the vote, what will happen is that, not to personalize, but Heidi will send out a Zoom ballot pad, and she will send it first out it will come out to everybody. But it will be made clear, and the bishop will again make clear when the time arrives, that only clergy will vote. So on the first vote, only lay people, Only lay will vote. So only lay members of synod will vote. This will be very clear. By the time we get it, it will be very clear. So when that first time, only lay members vote, and then it comes in, we tabulate the vote, and then we'll send out another pad that everybody will get, but only clergy may vote. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll see. So that's how the vote will occur. When it comes to bylaws, it'll be very simple. We just need it'll be a standard Zoom poll. So with that in mind, let's get this underway. So the first motion that we're going to bring, and this is really in a sense probably the most significant, if you will, are the canon amendments dealing with Episcopal elections. And as I said, as all of these amendments were done by way of a process through the various committees, but I should stress that there was, given as you've read through the documents, you'll see that the amendments there's been a lot more drafting, if you will, to both the changes to the canons and the bylaws dealing with the Episcopal elections. Work began on these changes in the summer of 2020 after last year's election, and I worked extensively with Doug Richards and Kim Chadsey, the previous secretaries of Synod, and more recently with Ann Chaplain, our current secretary, and then through the committee process. And I want to stress, as I always do, and most of you heard this before, but I think it's important to state that we are not making any substantive changes to the way we conduct elections through the amendments to these canons. I mean, our perception is that the process that we have now is a very robust one and has worked very well, where we have the process of public meetings and the candidates are nominated. There's a process for public meetings and public questions, and then the electoral synod takes place a few weeks later. We are not changing that process. What we are doing is really basically, as you'll see through the changes, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but what we've done is the main substantive change is that we've really made clear there were some issues in the last election about we needed to make some clarity about deadlines, just to make it clear what the deadlines are in order to kickstart that public meeting process that it's a key part of our electoral process. So what we've done here is clarified deadlines, and then two other changes we've made are substantive changes are this. We have now, you'll see that there is a new supplementary nominations committee, and the purpose of that committee is to have a committee of the diocese that makes a particular effort to seek out to encourage diversity in the candidates, the number of candidates who participate in an Episcopal election. This replaces, by the way, a provision that's currently in the canons that gives the House of Bishops the authority to automatically nominate candidates into our process. We've replaced that instead with a committee formed by members of the diocese itself. It'll be a sort of an ad hoc committee of council that, again, the committee will make the effort to seek diversity in nominations to the office of bishop. The other important change is the enactment of a new transition advisory committee. And what that essentially will do is, first of all, it acknowledges something that isn't in the canons at the moment, acknowledges the existence of the office of bishop-elect. And what it does is covers off the situation where you have a bishop chosen, elected in an election, and then a number of months follow before that bishop is actually installed, which was the case last year. And what this transition advisory committee does, it sets up a group of officers who are there to advise the bishop-elect on enabling that person to get ready to take on their important office, and gives the bishop-elect a role introductory role in the governance of the diocese. So those are the main changes that are set out in the first motion. So motion A, as you'll see, it says that, so whereas a resolution which contains the proposed amendments to the canons of the Incorporated Synod of the Diocese of Ottawa that's set out in this motion and is in the attachment that was sent out with motion A, well, that was approved by Diocesan Council at its meeting of September 14th. So therefore, I put forward a motion that be it resolved that pursuant to Canon 1.03, Bylaw 2 be repealed and replaced by the proposed text in the appendix that is attached to this motion. So I move this, and it's been seconded by the Reverend Stephen Silverthorne.
Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you very much, Henry. The motion is now before us. And as indicated, we will be voting by order. But before we go there, I would invite you to raise your hand electronically if you wish to speak to the motion. Here's as though we're ready for the question. The first vote will be by lay members of Synod only, lay members only, and the voting platform will be in front of you in a minute. Lay members only. So that vote has passed with a 2/3 majority. We now have the vote for clergy only. Clergy only. And that has also passed in the order of clergy by a 2/3 majority. Thank you very much. Henry, back to you again for the canon amendment concerning Episcopal remuneration.
Thank you, Bishop. So only because we need to go canon by canon. Normally what we'd have done if we'd only had one set of amendments, we'd have done the bylaws that relate to the Episcopal election, but because of the canons, we have to go do we'll skip to the next one dealing with Episcopal remuneration. So what this does, when I talked earlier about filling the gaps, and one of the interesting gaps in our canons, one that is this, we are one of the few dioceses that have canons that make absolutely no mention about remuneration of the bishop, which so we're going to cure that gap by making it clear that providing authority for the bishop actually to be paid. And the bylaws, as we'll discuss later, will go into a little more detail about how that process takes place. But here we're basically putting in the fundamental rule that authorizes the making of rules governing the remuneration of the bishop. So the motion is here before you. That this motion was approved by Diocesan Council in September. And as you'll see, it says that by the way, I should also stress that and again, we'll be hearing this in the bylaws, essentially the way we will be paying the diocese, assuming both the canon and the bylaw is passed, the process for paying the bishop will be very, very similar to the process we use for paying a salaried clergy in the diocese. So the language here, for those of you who may be CBR buffs, is very, very similar and is drawn from the same language governing clerical remuneration in Canon 4. So similarly, we're just basically saying that the bishops will be paid a salary under a structure approved by Synod with rates for component elements of the salary structure determined annually by Diocesan Council. That the Synod and Council may enact bylaws regarding pensions and other benefits for the bishops and spouses, and similarly that the giving a broad authority to make bylaws relating to the remuneration in that case for the bishop elect, so that there's authority to provide at least some remuneration for a bishop elect. That would be the case if we were to ever elect a bishop who came from outside the diocese, and so that we would need to pay a bishop elect for say the few months that the person prior to that person's installation. So there you are. That's the motion. I so move, and it's been seconded again by the Reverend Stephen Silverthorne.
Thank you very much. The motion is before us, duly moved and seconded. Would anyone care to speak to this motion? Again, we'll be voting by order. The first vote is for lay members of Synod, lay members only. The motion is carried by a 2/3 majority. The second vote is for clergy only, clergy only. That has also passed in the House of Clergy. So the motion to amend the canon concerning Episcopal remuneration is carried. We turn now to another canonical amendment concerning associate incumbents. Henry?
Thank you, Bishop. So the purpose of this amendment is to, again, fill a gap, and it is to have recognized in the canons the fact that we have been appointing for a number of years individuals to the position of associate incumbent in a parish. So it'll now be made clear in the canons that this office exists, and the authority of, or the basic authority of associate incumbents is set out in a new provision, as you'll see at the bottom of the motion, 407A, which essentially gives the parish authorizes the incumbent of a parish to exercise any of the responsibilities conferred on the incumbent of that parish, but in agreement with the incumbent. So we're authorizing the appointment of associate incumbents and setting out their basic responsibilities in motion C. So I move the motion before you, and again, Bishop, it's been seconded by the Reverend Stephen Silverthorne.
Again, the motion is now before us, moved and seconded. Would anyone care to speak to motion C? Carol Karkner.
Thank you, Bishop. Question about remuneration for the associate incumbent. Is there any motion coming forward about that, or is it already been decided upon?
Yeah, there's no particular motion coming up with respect to the remuneration of associate incumbents. They would be considered clergy, and so that would the provisions dealing with the remuneration of clergy would apply to associate incumbents.
Thank you.
I believe we're ready for the question. Again, the first vote is for lay members of the House only, lay members only. That has been carried by a 2/3 majority in the House of Laity. We'll now ask clergy only to vote, please. Clergy only. It has also passed by a 2/3 majority in the House of Clergy, so motion C has carried. We move now to motions concerning amendments to bylaws. This will not require voting by order. And again, I would ask our wonderful Chancellor, Henry Schultz, to speak to these bylaw amendments.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm blushing. Thank you all very much. So we're halfway through. I really do appreciate everybody for the way that you've been able to power on through this thing. So here we are, almost there. So now what we're doing, we're dealing with the bylaw amendments relating to Episcopal elections. So what this does, as I mentioned before, is they're really the only substantive changes to the bylaws, again, really relate to the just firming up some of the timelines. We did our best to clarify the timelines that are set out in Bylaw 2.09 at the end of the appendix that's attached to this motion. The rest of the changes really are relatively minor. The one change clergy may be interested is that we have made a change to the role of the chaplain. Previously, there was a single chaplain who was appointed to serve all candidates, and we basically changed the bylaws to reflect the reality that really effectively transpired in March of last year, where every candidate had his or her own chaplain. And it seems to make eminent sense, and so we've put that into the bylaw. So those are the basic changes in the bylaws. So without further ado, I propose that we amend the bylaws of the diocese as set out in the appendix, and I move, and this time seconded by Ann Chaplain.
So motion D is before us. It's been moved and seconded. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to this motion? Motion D. I'll ask for the question. Again, there is a single vote by the entire synod, all members of synod. Motion D has carried. We now turn to motion E. The motion is carried. We now turn to motion D, a bylaw amendment concerning Episcopal motion. I'm sorry, we're now on E, correct?
Yes.
There we are. Motion E, bylaw amendment concerning Episcopal remuneration. Over to you, Henry.
This amendment is the bylaw accompaniment, if you will, to the canonical amendment dealing with Episcopal remuneration. And again, one of the things I should have said when I was first talking about these provisions is not only are they sort of confirming, you know, an authority to pay the bishop, what we're doing is, particularly by way of this bylaw, is making the process of paying the bishop transparent, as transparent as the process for paying all clergy. So you see, pursuant to the terms of the bylaw, the benefits provided to the bishop are to be determined in the same manner as for other stipendiary clergy. It makes clear, among other things, that the bishop is entitled to the maximum housing allowance that's allowed for stipendiary clergy. And it also makes clear that his that the bishop's transportation allowance has a limit, in that it's basically 150%, if you will, of the maximum allowance. The bishop, given his position, gets a 50% top up. It also provides, just in case, an authority for other allowances to be paid to the bishop. And to be honest, I can't think of anybody. You know, you always want to have that possibility in case we feel another allowance needs to be paid to the bishop. But in the interest of transparency, any such additional allowance would have to be approved by Diocesan Council, and would have to be brought on the recommendation of the Director of Financial Ministry. Then, as part of the process of setting up, establishing the bishop's salary, what we've done is changed the current bishop's salary board. That's the name of the term currently in the bylaws, which, when you look at it, it actually, you think that it actually is the board dealing with the bishop's salary, but it isn't. It is a salary board chaired by the bishop. We've changed its name to the Clergy Remuneration Board, although it will also provide a deal with the remuneration of the bishop. So we've changed the name of that board, and we've clarified that the members will be the bishop, the dean, the director of financial ministry, the director of human resources, and a fifth lay person. You'll also note in the previous bylaw there, under in the same motion, that while that we make it clear that when that particular board deals with the bishop's salary, the bishop is recused from attending any such meeting, and the dean oversees that process. So with that, the motion is there before you. I so move, and it's seconded by Ann Chaplain.
Again, the motion is before us, motion E, concerning Episcopal remuneration. Does anyone wish to speak to this motion? I'll call for the vote then. A single vote, both houses. That motion is carried. We now turn to motion F. And this is the bylaw amendment concerning associate incumbents. Henry?
Yes, this is a bylaw, because the bylaws also mention, there's a section setting out the essential responsibilities of clergy. It's necessary to include this provision that basically mirrors what's already in the canons. I mean, associate incumbent is a cleric appointed to a parish who, in agreement with the incumbent of the parish, shares collegially with the incumbent in fulfilling duties required of an incumbent. So I so move, again seconded by Ann Chaplain.
The motion is before us, motion F. Does anyone wish to speak to this motion? I'll call the question. That motion has carried. Thank you all. We now move to motion G, affectionately called miscellaneous.
Indeed. Thank you, Bishop. We are coming down to the home stretch. These are three miscellaneous amendments, two of which sort of came out of the Episcopal election process. The first one is very much a, it's, if you will, it's a drafting convention provision in that we want to put a provision in the bylaws that basically says that any defined term that's used in the canons has the same meaning that's in the bylaws. So if you have the term bishop defined in the canons, the same meaning is in the bylaws. It seems minor, but it just saves a lot of drafting, and it would be handy to have that. And the second provision, this is an amendment to a bylaw that we actually enacted at our last in-person session, synod in October of 2019. And we're just making a minor change to the date. The current, so what this provision does is covers off the possibility where an Episcopal election is taking place very soon after the date by which new vestries have taken place and new members of synod have been appointed. And so there was a concern that you know, if you had an election that took place, well, the last election took place on March 14th, which would have been just days after after vestries had chosen their new lay members of synod, and would not have given those people enough time, and they could not have participated in the entire Episcopal electoral process. So what we did is we passed a bylaw that said that as long as an election is taking place prior to May 1st, then the members of synod the members of the previous year's synod remain as members of synod only for the purpose of engaging in the electoral synod. So what this does is changes that date from May 1st to May 15th, just to give the synod secretaries, just in case this happens again, gives the synod secretaries who run the election a little more time to make sure that they have that the process can go smoothly. It's just figured that by late May, you know, if we know that, say, all new vestries have taken place and all members of synod have been elected by, say, middle of March, that gives people enough time to participate in an election that would take place from late May onwards. So it's a minor date. As I say, right now the date is the 1st of May. We're just extending it to the 15th. And then the final bylaw is again, this is a question of filling gaps, and it's dealing with a gap that was identified during some information sessions relating to the Episcopal election provisions. And essentially what this does is clarify the bishop's authority to, as the executive of the diocese, to appoint directors and other officers, and particularly because our canons and bylaws now make specific reference. Our current bylaws do not make a reference to the Director of Human Resources, and we've just enacted new provisions that do. So it's important that we have a specific reference in the bylaws that allowing the bishop to appoint someone to that position. Similarly, because we also currently have a Director of Communications and Stewardship Development, we're going to make that reference as well. But the bishop also has authority to appoint other officers as he or she sees fit. And as you'll see, these officers are non-voting members of synod, and it's made clear that any such appointment of other officers that requires an increase in budget must be approved by diocesan council. So I move these resolutions, and again, it's seconded by Ann Chaplain.
So motion G is now before us, duly moved and seconded. Would anyone care to speak to motion G? Colleen has a question.
Thank you, Bishop Shane. I'm curious to know why the Director of Communications and Director of Stewardship Development are the same person. What is the distinction there? I see one as communications and the other perhaps as financial stewardship, but maybe I'm missing something important.
Thank you, Colleen. It is not uncommon for those two functions to be under one directorship. It is cost effective for us to do it that way. There is provision in this to create a different configuration of directors if we feel that would be helpful as we move through time. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else care to speak? I will now call the question. That motion G has carried. We now move to the last of a big chew here. Motion H, bylaw amendment, appropriately called housekeeping.
Indeed. Yes, this really is. This really is a housekeeping motion. In what this, what we're doing is confirming a decision of Diocesan Council taken in April. And it basically, what this does is reflect the facts that the three entities that we see there before they're described in these bylaws no longer exist. So the Canterbury House Bookstore, alas, no more, and the Temple Pastors Mission is no longer part of the diocese. And similarly, the diocese no longer has an advisory committee of the Anglican Studies program. And given that these facts, it seems to it's eminent good sense that we that we remove references in our bylaws that establish that organizations, those entities. So the purpose of these bylaws is to of this bylaw, this motion is to repeal those three bylaw provisions relating to those three entities. So I move this motion, and again, and finally, seconded by Ann Chaplain.
Thank you, Henry. Motion H, a bylaw amendment, moved by Henry, seconded by Ann Chaplain, is before us. Would anyone care to speak to this final bylaw amendment? I'll call the question then. Please vote. That motion has carried. Henry, thank you very, very much to you, to our secretaries of synod, and everyone else you consulted with within our diocese and outside our diocese to bring forward these really important motions. In some respects, these motions refer to cleaning up and housekeeping. In other respects, these changes give us tools to work with as we look to the future. And finally, some of the canons that we've changed do represent us moving away from a time that has passed and positioning us to look to the future with important principles of governance in place, in particular, the principle of transparency. So I'm very grateful to you, Henry, and to those you've worked with, and to everyone for your patience and diligence in moving forward these motions related to some of the rules that govern us. Thank you very much. We now turn to a nominations report, which will be offered by the Reverend Canon Doug Richards, who chairs the nominations subcommittee of our governance committee.
Thank you, Bishop. Bishop, members of Synod, it is my pleasure to present the 2021 nominations report. The nominations subcommittee earlier in the year sent out a request for nominations to Diocesan Council, the advisory panel on the termination of clerical appointments, Trinity College Corporation, and General Synod. As the names were submitted, they were collated and submitted to the governance committee for their approval. And then the co-chairs of the governance committee presented the slate of officers to Diocesan Council for their approval, and then for them to be present at this synod. In the pre-synod package that we received by email, you will find the 2021 nominations report along with the biographical sketches of all the nominees. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to the members of the nominations subcommittee, as well as to everyone who was nominated. It is my pleasure to move the nominations report. It is moved that Synod approve the slate of candidates nominated by Diocesan Council to serve on the 4 bodies as enumerated in the report of the nominations subcommittee. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you very much, Doug. So we have the nominations motion before us. It will be seconded by Ann Chaplain. It's not being seconded by Ann Chaplain. Would someone please care to second the motion concerning nominations, which is before us? Just raise your hand electronically. Carol Karkner will second this motion. We all understand that this is a slate that we are approving. Would anyone care to speak to the motion? I'll call the vote now. Please vote at this time. The motion has carried. Notwithstanding what I said earlier about transparency being an important part of governance, we will not be requesting biological information on candidates in the future. Thanks very much, Ken and Doug. We will now take a break and we will resume at 11 a.m. Oh, I'm sorry, there is an election that's going to happen during the break. I'm sorry. And Ann Chaplain will walk us through the election procedures.
Thank you, Bishop. As I understand it, what we just did was receive the report of the nominations committee and approve the slate of candidates. For 2 of the 4 bodies, we are actually going to have an election because there are more candidates than there are seats on the bodies in question. And the advantage to that, and the hard work the nominations committee did, is that we will, by this process, generate alternate members. There'll be the people who are elected, and then there will be alternate members who will be the people who put their names forward, but were not elected at this time. So for 2 of the bodies, Trinity College Corporation and our delegates on behalf of the Diocese of Ottawa to General Synod, there are more candidates than there are positions. In the case of Trinity College Corporation, we need 1 member, and we have 2 nominees. In the case of General Synod, we need 7 members. One is acclaimed, and that is our youth member, Rebecca Gregg. But in the case of clergy, we need 3 members, but we have 5 nominees. In the case of lay members, we need 3 members, and we have 4 nominees. So to conduct the election, which is actually going to happen during this break, we're going to use a form which has been sent to you in your Synod package, which is a Google form, which Heidi Fawcett has provided to you. We do not need to vote by houses. All that's required is that each member of Synod use that form and select 1 person for Trinity College Corporation, then 3 clergy for General Synod, 3 lay people for General Synod. And the form is self-explanatory and shouldn't allow you to make mistakes. At least we tried it, and it didn't allow any of us to make mistakes. Heidi is going to right now, in case the link is not clear in your package, Heidi is going to put the link in the chat function. So it will be at the foot of your screen at this moment. And all you have to do is click on it. So please take the next few minutes to do that. As Doug said, the biographical information for the candidates is in the package that you received for Synod. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to deal with them. Thank you.
So if there are questions, I would ask you all to please vote using the link that has been provided to you. And when you have voted, please take a break. We will resume at 11 a.m. 11 a.m.
Bishop, it's Tom Jones here.
Go ahead, Tom.
I wish to withdraw from the election, please.
Okay, Tom Jones has withdrawn from the slate of candidates. Okay. Are there any other questions? Again, please vote now, and then we'll be on break until 11 a.m. 11 a.m. Thank you all very much, and see you soon.
Hello, I'm not sure if anyone in the administration can hear this, but on the General Synod elections, we're being asked to select 3 nominees, and I am not able to select more than 1 at this point. Heidi, I'm wondering if you could fix that poll to allow more than 1 selection.
Whoever was asking the question with regard to not being able to select more than one, you have to use each line. You cannot select more than one on one line.
Oh my heavens, thank you. I just noticed that, and thank you so much for the clarification.
You're very welcome. I run Zoom calls and poll units all the time.
So do I. That's the frightening part.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break. We will now move to the next item on our agenda, which concerns our financial ministry. And I would invite our Director of Financial Ministry, Sanjay Grover, to address the House at this time. Sanjay? Here's Sanjay now. Sanjay, we can't hear you at this time.
Sorry, my error. I didn't realize I was on mute. Sorry about that. Thank you, Bishop Shane. Good morning, folks. I will provide a short presentation on the 2020 financials and a bit of an update for the 2021 status as we deal through the pandemic. Hopefully, the worst is behind us. Financially and operationally speaking. I'm going to share my screen and start the slideshow. Just give me 1 minute. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. As you're all aware, the audited financial statements include, the Incorporated Synod of Diocese of Ottawa financials, which combines all the funds held by the Synod. By funds, I mean, operational funds. I'm hoping you've had a chance to review them online through the Synod circular. These financial statements are audited by Deloitte, as we have done over the years. As far as reporting on the audit, there was no uncorrected errors, no internal control weaknesses, no fraud that they noticed. Well, there was no fraud. The audit went pretty smoothly. It was done remotely as we were, working from home, and the auditors were working from home. So all the audit work was done via emails and exchange of documents, electronically. As far as the audit was the opinion was concerned, as usual, there was a clean opinion on the audit, except for there was a restriction as far as cash donations are concerned, because they're unable to audit that aspect of it. But that's been historically the case. There was discussions with the auditors themselves and the audit committee and my staff, our group here, and things did go very smoothly as far as the audit was concerned. At this stage, I would like to actually acknowledge both the auditors and Bill and Sandra in my group. They did perform very well through the audit and over the last year and a half, as we have worked from home, but there have been no operational challenges. We have kind of worked around, and all the receipts and disbursements have been on time, and things have gone quite smoothly. Moving forward, as far as going into some of the details, the balance sheet, which you're aware, looks at the total assets and the liabilities of the diocese, of our diocese. The total assets are at $109 million from $102 million in 2019. And the liabilities are at $90.7 million, up from $85 million in 2019. Accounts receivables were at $1.9 million in 2020 compared to $1.26 million in 2019. Thus, a net equity of $18.3 million, which was up about 1.3 from the year before. Net equity, by that I mean a combination of equities from all the different funds that the financial statements include, which is the operational fund, pay fund, insurance fund, extension fund, and so on. In 2020, the Synod, our diocese, cashed in a 2 million GIC, which was invested the year before. These funds originated from a bank loan that was obtained for the JCR house renovations. As you're aware, or you might be aware, that we did get a mortgage for the renovations, and the bank, instead of giving us construction draws, they gave us the money upfront. And instead of paying construction period interest on it, which we did, but we took the money and put it into a GIC to save on some of the interest expenses and earn some interest along the way. Fixed assets, as far as there were additions totaling of $2.93 million, which was primarily the JCR house renovations, which were capitalized, and CCBC affordable housing project, as you're aware, which is on the way as well. Our diocese investment in the CTF, the trust funds, is $16.9 million in 2020, and it was $14.9 million in 2019. And this is primarily a market value increase over the year. The fund has performed really well, and more on that in a bit. Now, revenues and expenditures. Our revenues are at $5.8 million in 2020. In 2019, they were at $7.9 million, so a drop. But that can be explained because in 2019 we did sell a large, a church in Ottawa, and the proceeds were included in the total revenue. And same as expenditures, were at $6.27 million in 2020, $8.2 million in 2019. Again, the disposition of the property, the church, was included in the $8.2 million. That's why that dropped. So initial deficit of $423,000 in 2020. We also had as I said earlier, a market value increase in our investments, both in the CTF and the Cathedral Foundation, of $394,000 and $85,000 respectively. So a net small surplus of $56,000 during 2020. Moving forward. And this is a breakdown of total revenue of $6.334 million, which includes the market value increase, as I mentioned earlier. And parish fair share contributes about 33% of it. Community ministries is at about 39%, primarily the funding from the city of Ottawa. I do want to acknowledge their contribution into success of our community ministries, plus the contributions from T4T, leading up to 38.7% of our total revenue. And then diocesan administration, which is the service charges that are applied to providing financial services to various community ministries. And here is a breakdown of our expenses. Again, as is understandable, the community ministries have the largest chunk of our expenditures just because of the services they provide and the revenue that comes in from the city. And the rest are kind of under 20%, but community ministries being the largest portion of our expenditures. Also, I'm going to bring this back in a bit, but the Canada wage subsidy through the pandemic, we recognized a $294,000 revenue item during the year from the wage subsidy. I seem to be having a bit of a problem moving my slides. Just bear with me. There we go. The parochial pay and insurance fund. It generated a surplus of $311,000. In 2019, there was a deficit of $5,000. The insurance fund generated a loss of $180,000 during 2020. And in 2019, there was a loss of $45,000. This is primarily because of different insurance claims that are self-insured. As you're aware that, any insurance claims that are under $25,000 are covered by the diocese self-insurance, and anything excess goes to ecclesiastical for a claim. So there was a fair bit of claims during the year, which were covered by the diocese. That led to a loss of $180,000 in this fund. Total fund balance of the parochial pay fund and the insurance fund is $1.1 million, up from $980,000 from the year before. Again, going back to the wage subsidy, $1.5 million of funding was recognized during 2020. As I said earlier, I'll come back to that and explain it a little bit. Parish managed capital asset fund. There was $154,000 of additions in 2020 versus 2019, $183,000 additions made by various parishes. This would include, a parish putting up a new roof or adding, putting air conditioning or a furnace and filing that in their stat return. So we would go ahead and add that as an asset on our books. As far as sales are concerned, in 2020, there was no sales of diocesan-owned properties in the operations fund. On the parish side, there was two properties that were sold. One was rectory at former St. George Campbell's Bay. It was sold for $48,000. And the rectory at St. Paul's Church in Combermere, it was sold for $102,000. Real Estate Stewardship Fund, which was established about 4 years ago to look after our properties and provide for different studies as far as building studies and whatnot, has had a balance of $199,000 in 2020 versus a 2019 there was a $183,000 balance, which included net revenues from property operations and allocations of net proceeds as per policy. Gain of $16,000 compared to $72,000 surplus in 2019, and this is primarily because of market value of investments that were made by the stewardship fund. Moving on to the Consolidated Trust Fund, so there's some good news here. Unit holder capital was worth $58.5 million with 2.14 million units outstanding in 2020, with the total of investment value of $59 million. In 2019, it was $52.3 million. Unit holder capital was, in 2019, the unit holder capital was at $52.7 million with 2.01 million units outstanding. As I mentioned earlier, there was the capital is worth 58.5 in 2020. Unit worth was at $27.32 a unit. In 2019, it was $25.14 a unit. So an 8.67 increase year to year, which is quite good. As far as ownership of the fund, the parishes owned 59% of the fund in 2020. The Synod owned about 32%. Cathedral Hill Foundation owned about 6%, and the retirement fund, 3%. This has been the historical pattern, give or take 1% movement between these, but it's pretty stable. Dividend rate per year, dividend rate in 2020 is set at 77 cents, which increased from 75 cents from the previous year. $1.6 million were paid out in dividends, which represented a return of close to 3%, sorry. As you're aware, even though our returns are higher, we do have a very conservative dividend rate at 3%, so that we can pay dividends regardless what the markets do, so that it provides stability, in parish operations. And we don't want to have a year where the dividends are at 5%, and then a year where the markets don't do well, we don't pay out dividends. So we have a conservative policy, and it pays out a 3%, or it has paid out a 3% dividend over the years. Having said that, the investment subcommittee and property and finance have approved an increase in dividend rate of close to 4%. So there will be more information being sent out to parishes down the road to expect, a little bit more as far as dividends are concerned, which is a bit of a good news during these times. Moving forward to the extension fund, the net assets of the extension fund at year end had a value of $5.1 million, which comprised of $2 million in cash, $3 million in mortgages, plus loans to the Synod of $186,000. 8 parishes made use of the church extension fund in 2020, with outstanding loans of just over $2.2 million. In 2020, parishes repaid a total of $265,000, whereas no additional funds are borrowed by any parishes, which is understandable, I guess, with what we've been through, as far as close downs and whatnot during 2020 related to the pandemic. Revenue total about $149,000 or $150,000 compared to $149,000 in 2019. Expenses of $134,000 and revenue, in 2020, and in 2019, $131,000. The extension fund received $15,000 from sale of parish managed capital assets. As I mentioned, we sold 2 properties, and as per policy, there is a contribution that goes into the extension fund pool. I'll stop here for the moment just to take some questions, and then I'll have a bit more of an update to give on the 2021.
Thank you, Sanjay. Are there any questions? No questions at this time. Please continue, Sanjay.
Okay, thank you, Richard. As you're all aware, we did take part in our benefit from the Canada wage subsidy to help us through the pandemic. And I want to thank all of you for sending in all your monthly reports as far as the changes in revenue, donations, and whatnot. We did fairly well compared to the other dioceses across the country. I think the drops in revenue across the country were over 20%, and we were just under. So we did well from that perspective, and thank you all for that. As far as benefiting from the wage subsidy, as you all recall, in 2020, diocesan support was provided to parishes in the form of a forgiveness of the parish fair share, insurance, and ECOPs. And that totaled about an expense on the diocesan books of $1.735 million, which was offset by the wage subsidy that we received from the federal government. So for the 2020 year, as I mentioned, we had an expense of $1.7 million, and we recovered $1.8 million in 2020. In 2021, we provided the support for 1 month, which was $875,000. And to date, we have filed, the wage subsidy, the wage subsidy program of, till period 15, which brings us to April. And then we have projected as to what we will recover. And we will recover $762,000. This is because, our revenue drops, the subsidy is based on revenue drops, and our revenue drops have been smaller in the last year or so. So we provided a support of $875,000, and we expect to receive $762,000, during 2021. So there is a bit of a deficit. All in all, the total program wage subsidy and the benefits provided to the support provided to parishes is going to cost the diocese about close to $29,000, which we will absorb. As also you're aware that the program ended on October 21st, I believe, and it's not going to be, we will not be receiving any more wage subsidies from the federal government. So there will be a decision made early in the next year, how we proceed going forward as far as any additional support to the parishes. But for the moment, it's we have an overall deficit of $28,000, and hopefully with us opening up again and things moving forward, we should have some good news as far as finances, both at the parish level and at the diocesan level. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Are there any questions for Sanjay at this time?
Bishop, I have a question. It's Meredith Brophy from Holy Trinity Metcalf.
Go ahead.
Sanjay, have you had any discussions or thoughts about continuing the requirement for monthly income reports from parishes?
Yes, the program, as I mentioned, has ended in October. So that means that monthly reports are due up until end of October and not after.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Canon Kenneth Davis.
Yes, I sent this through the chat, but would I be correct in knowing then that there will be no further grants to parishes in 2021?
That will be taken up by the Property and Finance Committee early in the new year. The decision has not been made yet.
Okay, but for the remainder of this year, there won't be another month like April.
No, that's not exactly. You're right.
Yes, thank you.
One more thing, the presentation I had will be on the Synod circular shortly.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we'll move now to the motion concerning our auditors. And it's moved by Sanjay Grover, and I believe is seconded by John McBride, that Synod appoint the firm of Deloitte and Touche as auditors for the 2021 financial statements of our diocese. The motion is before us, moved and seconded. Are there any questions? John, do you wish to speak to this?
Just a few words. Just to let you know that the Deloitte has been our auditor for several years, and periodically we have done an RFP several years ago, and you do an RFP if you have a concern for governance purposes, but if you have a concern over quality or price. We have no concerns over quality, and over the last 6 years, their fee has gone up approximately 1.5% a year. But saying that, it behooves the audit committee and we will be undertaking a comprehensive analysis and review of Deloitte this year. This is not an unusual situation where you have the auditors on board for many years. So that's why we will be undertaking a in-depth comprehensive review as well.
Thank you very much, John. John, of course, is the chair of our audit committee. Are there any other questions?
Bishop, I just wanted to add that, I completely agree with John's comments. And we do on an annual basis, have a review. But as you said, there will be a comprehensive review coming up. Also, changing auditors can be quite a challenge because the corporate knowledge that is with auditors has to be transferred to a new auditor, and that can significantly impact operations as far as the finance group is concerned.
Thank you. Again, the motion is before us. Would anyone else care to speak to it? I'll call the question. Please vote. So the motion is carried. Thank you again, Sanjay, and thanks to the property and finance team and our auditors, our audit committee. I think we can all feel a reassuring sense of our collective strength as we see our financial reports. It's only one dimension of our strength, but it is important. And I hope we can celebrate that in some way and use that, leverage that collective financial strength as we go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We turn now to looking to the future. And Brian Cameron, chair of our Episcopal Communications panel, will give us an update on how we're going to be observing our 125th anniversary year. Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Bishop, and good morning again, everyone. Early this past summer, the Diocesan Communications Advisory Panel was tasked by Bishop Shane to think of ways in which the 125th anniversary could be commemorated beginning this fall. The guiding principle was that the commemoration should be forward-looking and not retrospective. The pandemic created a good deal of uncertainty about what activities would be possible. Most notably, would we be able to gather in person? So after considering many creative ideas, we settled on a set of activities that wouldn't be constrained by COVID limitations in a 5-month period beginning now at Synod and ending next April, the month in which the diocese was established. The first activity in the commemoration was the launch of our new brand, which you saw earlier this morning. And as you also saw, the 125th anniversary has been incorporated in the new branding. The second is a series of anniversary lectures on 4 themes: Indigenous issues, affordable housing, the environment, and reimagining church. The first lecture on Indigenous issues will take place in December. This lecture will be co-sponsored by All My Relations, and the speaker will be Michelle Good, the author of 5 Little Indians, which won the Governor General's Award in 2020, as well as the Writers' Trust Fiction Prize and the 2021 Amazon Canada First Novel Award. After that, in January, we're planning to feature Jason McKinney, a Toronto priest whose lectures and workshops on the theology of land have been highly recommended by the Homelessness and Affordable Housing Working Group. His lecture will take place in January. For February, we'll be offering a lecture on an environmental theme with a speaker or panel that we'll announce later. And then the series will conclude with a lecture on the Reimagining Church theme in March by Sam Wells, the Vicar of St. Martin in the Fields in London. Some of you will have heard him speak during a previous visit to Ottawa in 2015. If you did, you'll know how challenging and perceptive a speaker he is. The theologian Walter Brueggemann described Sam Wells as having arguably the liveliest, most agile, best informed, critically disciplined mind in the entire Christian community. So something to look forward to in March. All of these lectures will be live streamed and available afterwards on the Diocesan YouTube channel. Last but not least, a commemoration of the 125th anniversary will be included in the liturgy on New Year's Day, at which the primate will be present. So I'd like to thank the members of the 125th Anniversary Working Group for all their work, including Leanne Williams and David Humphreys, who've been instrumental in proposing and approaching speakers for the lecture series, as well as Audrey Lawrence and Debbie Grisdale of All My Relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I'm so pleased with the work that the panel has done with respect to the 125th anniversary and how the 4 lectures will be available to all of us, whether we can be there in person or not. That's just wonderful. Some very fine speakers there. And I know the environmental speaker or speakers will also be informative and challenging for us as well in all the right ways. We will be gathering in person in our cathedral on January 1st as the liturgical marking of the year, and that will also be live streamed so that we can all participate in that. So thank you again, Brian, as we look forward to the future in this anniversary year. Thank you so much. At this point in our agenda, we would be turning to the results of our elections. And I'm asking Stephen to back there. Stephen, are you ready to go?
Yes, Bishop, thank you. To announce then the, can you hear me? Okay. I'd like to announce then the results of the election. First, to the Trinity College Corporation. Pardon? Okay. Okay, so it looks like we have a couple of more minutes that we need to verify the results.
Could you go on mute, please, Steve? Okay, so it appears as though there's a process of verification that needs to happen now. And perhaps, Stephen, you could announce the dates of next year's synod at this time while we're waiting, please.
Yes, I'm sorry. The scrutineers are still verifying the results to patch them, make sure that they are in proper order. The results, excuse me, the date for the upcoming synod in 2022. The dates are October 20th, 21st, and 22nd. So do please mark your calendars to ensure that you are available during that time. So next year's synod in 2022 is October 20th, 21st, and 22nd. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to just suggest that we take an in-place break. Please do not leave your screens and cameras and microphones. We're running a bit early, which is good news, and we are waiting for the election results. So we'll simply pause and please remain in your places and have a break.
No canned music?
I'll come back on to speak to that. The question came in asking whether or not next year's synod will be in person. And of course, that would be wonderful. It will be a synod where we'll be making very, very important decisions using consensus decision-making. It will be a pivotal synod as we look to reshaping our parish ministry. God willing, we will meet in person. As I like to say, God willing and people behaving, we will meet in person. The science is there to get us out of this pandemic. Vaccine equity is not yet there across the world. And we need to ensure that the pandemic is firmly over before we can meet in substantially large numbers for residential synod. So the hope remains, and God willing, we will meet in person next year. You will have seen in last week's COVID communique, that there are some signs of moving out of the pandemic with respect to how vaccination and capacity are now related. I commend that communique to you. Again, with thanks to the Reverend Michael Garner, who is our public health advisor, who works with senior staff and Archdeacon Linda Hill in particular to make sure that we are responsive and responsible as we manage our way out of this pandemic. We will get out of the pandemic, and we will do so and face whatever lies in the future with all the resilience and strength we have in our midst at this time. Our scrutineers are still doing the work. As you can imagine, there isn't little bits of paper in front of us, so it's going to take a little bit of time. I would say that on Monday, 2 weeks from now, I will be attending virtually the Synod of the Diocese of Jerusalem, our companion diocese in the Middle East. And I'll be bringing greetings from our diocese. And at that time, we'll be signaling my intention to renew our partnership under the signature of myself and Archbishop Hossam. So that will be a nice way for us to reach out. The meeting of the bishops of the Anglican Communion is scheduled to take place in person next summer. There have been conversation groups of bishops from across the world, across the communion, which have been taking place once a month, which is an opportunity for bishops to get to know one another and to reflect on themes related to our common life as a communion at this time. When I participate in those conversations and when I go to Lambeth, I bring you with me. This is not a personal visit. This is a gathering of bishops who, as Canon Gebo said, represent and embody each diocese in our communion. And that will be an important meeting. It will be unusual to meet face to face. Again, God willing, we'll be able to do so safely. So that's in July next year. The House of Bishops of the Anglican Church of Canada met in person in Niagara Falls in late September. 3 or 4 members joined us virtually. Again, we were appropriately distanced and masked throughout that time. It is very good for the bishops of our church to gather, to compare notes, to be helpful to one another. And I can tell you that our experience here in our diocese is similar in many ways to other dioceses. There's been about a 20% drop in revenue right across the board. The issues that we have faced in trying to stay connected are faced by others. However, it is clear that some of our dioceses have not been able to cope as well as we have. Those of us in our diocese who do not have easy internet access, and I know there are places where there is not internet access, imagine if most of your diocese is limited in that way. And so we journeyed together. The tone at the House of Bishops was constructive and positive, conciliatory, and I would describe it as a healing time. That's important for us all to appreciate, that there is not a quality in the House of Bishops that works against us being collaborative, cooperative, and mutually supportive. And that bodes very well for our church as we move into the future. We can have differences and we can agree to disagree in ways that are Christ-like. And that was very evident in the meeting of the House of Bishops. I mentioned earlier that I will be in touch with the Diocese of Jerusalem. My hope is to lead pilgrimages to the Diocese of Jerusalem once that is possible. And I hope many of you will be able to join me on those. It's expensive, it's not for everyone, but for those who are able to have that time in the land of the Holy One is a profound experience and builds up good relationships amongst ourselves and those who have gone, as well as critically allowing us to accompany our sisters and brothers, our siblings in the Diocese of Jerusalem, who are a minority of a minority of a minority. And knowing that we uphold them and our visits are profoundly supportive of them. I was there in 2014, a solidarity visit, you might describe it as. I went for a week to spend time with my colleague, Hassan. We were both cathedral deans at that time, and to journey with him for a week, shadow him. And that was very, very telling. In many ways, the Diocese of Jerusalem is where we are. It is a minority in the Middle East, in Israel and in Palestine. But its community ministry, so to speak, make it appear as though it's far more populous than it actually is. And we can learn a lot from that. While our parish ministries, our population base may not be as large as it once was, we can and are and will position ourselves as a resource to the world around us. We can do things as a diocese that a lot of organizations cannot do. And we can bring to the things we do our values of hospitality, of compassion, of treating people as whole persons and responding and serving them as whole persons, not just meeting one specific need. So that partnership with Jerusalem is a good one. When I was there, I traveled with Hossam around the security wall to have a Bible study in the home of one of his Arab Palestinian Anglican parishioners. And on the way there, Hossam said, I'd like you to lead the Bible study, which is how things happen there. You know, you find out you're doing something en route, which was wonderful. And the Bible study was conducted in Arabic. I am not fluent in Arabic, so Hossam had to translate for me. And by way of this illustration, to talk about the abundance of God, which was relevant to the scripture package, I made the very risky decision to tell a joke in English through an interpreter to an Arab audience. And the joke went something like this. There was a fellow out working in a field. Everybody could relate to what a field is. And he was working by a stone wall. Everybody's good so far. And when he was digging in the stone wall collapsed, and inside was a little box. And he opened the box, and this is where things got difficult. I said, and out jumped a leprechaun. And poor Hossam had no idea what I was talking about. So I said, a leprechaun, Hossam, a little fella like that. And he was trying to find the word. And then he said, a genie. I said, yes, a genie jumped out of the box. So he translated it and we're all good. And so the joke went on. So the genie said to the man who had been digging, I'm going to give you 2 wishes. I've been locked up in this box for hundreds of years. I'm so happy to go out. I'm going to give you 2 wishes, whatever you want, whatever you want. And the fellow thought for a bit and he said, well, I'd really like a glass of beer. And so the genie said to him, I can do much better than that. And into his hand appeared a beautiful glass of beer. And the genie said, this is not an ordinary glass of beer, as you will see. And so the fellow drank the glass of beer and then it filled up again immediately. It was an always fill, abundant glass of beer. The little genie said, look, I've been locked up for a couple of hundred years. I'm getting impatient. I need to move on. You know, what's your second wish? And the fella thought for a minute. He said, I'll have another one of these. A joke about the superabundance of God's grace if you work it a little bit. Anyway, there we are. I'm just going to check in with the people who are with me in our Cathedral's Great Hall to see where we're at with the election results. So we're going to announce part of the election results at this time, and that concerns the Trinity College election. I'll ask Stephen to speak to that now.
Thank you, Bishop. So far, we have one election result verified, and that's for the Trinity College Corporation. I can say that, or Trinity College Board. I can say that Lynn Meredith has been elected and verified as the candidate that has received the most votes. We have word that we're very, very close to our receiving the General Synod votes as well.
The good news is that we're well under time. The difficult news is that we need a little bit more time. So I just ask for your patience. And we have constantly getting used to the Zoom format. Had we been thinking, we would have had the nomination report in first thing this morning, but here we are. That's how we get wise. We make mistakes. Yeah. Okay, I've just received an update. The difficulty is that when we voted electronically, apparently some people voted twice. So it's very difficult to tease that out. So I've discussed this with our chancellor, and what we will do is to announce the vote after synod. You'll see a notice come out as soon as possible, which means we need to amend the motion. Could you please put that up, Heidi? And the amendment will simply be destroyed after the count has been announced. Okay, everyone understands the modification? So the motion is before us. I would ask you to please vote now. It's carried. And that motion has carried. We now move to our final acts of this synod, and I'll turn things over to our lay secretary at this time.
Thank you, Bishop. I am going to ask you if you concur in the proceedings of the 141st session of the Synod of the Diocese of Ottawa.
I concur with the proceedings of the 141st Synod of the Diocese of Ottawa. We have announced that next year's Synod will be October 20 to 21st. As we gather now in these final moments of this Synod, I would ask that you all bring into your mind a prayer of thankfulness for the many gifts of individuals in our diocese, for the many gifts of our councils and groups and task forces and committees and panels who have enabled us to gather now and to do the work that was before us today. In that place of thanksgiving, let us now listen together to these words. Dear friends, God the Holy Spirit is already in our future. So be steadfast in faith, joyful in hope, and untiring in love every day of your life. And the blessing of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit be with each of you and those you love in heaven and on earth. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks